Hi, welcome back. I am so happy to bake with you this week. We are doing cornbread and grits. And if you have never had freshly milled cornbread and grits, you are in for a treat. It is so fresh and vibrant. There's different flavors than normal. When I used to make the blue box cornbread, which is always very good, it's still good, but I thought that was cornbread. Until I actually made my own cornbread from scratch, and I kind of just sat and ate half the pan, and then my kids came in and said, "Where's the rest?" And they ate the rest of it because it just is fresh and good, and you can actually taste the corn, you know, not just sugar that may be added to the box mixes, but homemade grits, also phenomenal. I have one daughter and I who absolutely love grits, and others enjoy it, but the cornbread is a big hit in the house. But real fresh corn grits are absolutely amazing. So join me today as we bake delicious food. Well, bake and cook. I guess we don't bake grits. King James Bond, our rooster, says hello. Okay, so let's get into it. I wanted to say a little bit about corn because I think it's got quite a bad rap. But we need to understand, just like wheat, if we take the wheat berry and we strip it for parts and sell bran here and germ here and minerals here, just like salt, if we strip it for parts, sell it off, and what we're left with is just dead product, and it isn't going to serve us well. When we eat it, it's not going to help us like it should, like God intended. God gave us these beautiful whole grains, whole, like real salt, you know, and corn is the same way. If we strip it for parts and use bits and pieces of it, which is where you hear all the things, the bad things about corn, it's not used whole. And so it gets a bad name. So I want to dispel any fears about corn and know that when we start from scratch with our kernels, or we use dent corn, you're using the whole of the corn, and so it works together as it should in our bodies and gives us the nutrients and the fiber that we need. And I do my research for y'all, and I'm looking at Sue Becker's book and Marlene Ann Baumgartner's book. And I want to make sure I give you all the right information because I am not an expert, so I learn things and would like to share that with you. If you're not interested in learning corn terminology or tidbits, then fast forward and we'll get into baking in a minute. But I read that corn has the highest antioxidants in any of the grains, and it's even got twice as many antioxidants as apples, which that's amazing because we all need antioxidants. So I said dent corn earlier. There's different kinds of corn. So we know sweet corn. Sweet corn is when the cobs are harvested, when the corn on the cob is still soft, you know, and that's canned. That's what we eat as a vegetable. That's corn that we know is a vegetable. Dent corn is when you leave the corn on the cob, on the stalk, and let everything dry out. And it's called dent corn because when it dries out, the sides sink in because the moisture's gone. So there's a dent in it. I didn't know that. So there's a tidbit for today. But so that's what's used to make corn flour, cornmeal, grits, polenta. That is the kind of corn we have. And there's also popcorn. And it's a more compact version. It can be used as flour and grits, but it's a little bit more coarse overall, so it's better to use the dent corn. Some people prefer the coarseness of the popcorn, and if that's what you have, then use it. It's still really good and nutrient filled. But they say, I'm going to read this so I don't mess it up. Sue Becker says, like dent corn, it's dried on the stalk, but the kernel is more compact than dent corn. It's got a hard, moisture-resistant hull. So when it's heated, the steam it creates by its moisture content builds up inside the tough hull and it explodes, and that's where you get popcorn. I remember being little and asking, can you use any corn to make popcorn, and not really knowing the answer. So That's exciting. So then we have sweet corn, dent corn, popcorn, and now there are some terms that I get confused with a little bit. Corn flour, corn meal, grits, and polenta. And so corn flour is simply corn that is milled to the finest it can be. That's corn flour. You can substitute that in any baking you want, and it's going to be really good. Corn meal is just coarser corn flour, and that's what we're going to make our cornbread with. And if you like a coarser texture, a bigger crumb, you can use cornmeal in a lot of baking and get a different texture out of it, which is really fun. And corn has a good flavor, so it adds a nice flavor to anything you bake with. And then grits and polenta are kind of the same thing. Grits are a little bit coarser, and that's what we know as the, Southern breakfast foods, kind of a porridge. And then polenta is more an Italian. I'll have Italians really mad at me if I say it's Italian grits, but it's an Italian food. So polenta is cornmeal that is boiled and eaten as a soft mush or formed into firmer cakes. Grits may be slightly more coarsely ground than polenta and are used in similar ways. So that's the authority saying what that is. So now that we have our terminology out of the way, and we can understand a little bit more about corn, there is one thing to note. Most of the corn grown in the USA is genetically modified. And we want to steer clear of that as much as we can. So you want to aim for getting organic food as much as you can. So buying organic corn would be the way to go. Sometimes it's just so pricey, it's impossible. We're a one-income family, so we just have to make better choices where we can make them and work in our budget. So if you happen to see a good price on organic corn, stock up, and if not, I think you're going to get really good results either way. Also, corn does, even though it's dry, it's got a moisture content inside of it, and so you really need to make sure you store it in an airtight container in the cooler part of your house where you can. I have a kind of a grain closet in the middle of our house that we happened to find doing some renovations and reconstruction. So it became our grain closet. God saved it for the right time. If we would have found that right away, it'd be a coat closet or something. But right when I started getting into milling, my husband was in the roof and said, "There's a room down there that's in the wall." So we knocked down the wall, and boom, I now have a grain closet, which God planned for us to find right at the right time when I needed to store big buckets of grains and corns and zucchini and honey granules. And I thought, where am I going to keep all this? God provided a way. There is yellow corn and white corn, and yellow corn has a stronger flavor. And we kind of think of cornbread as being made out of yellow corn and grits being out of white. White has a little bit milder flavor, but for me, it's whatever I use for one, I use for both. Because when you make grits, inevitably you're going to get corn flour or cornmeal because you have to grind or mill the corn, and you separate out the grits and all of the flour or meal comes down. So I have grits and I have everything I need to make the cornbread. So we have both together. And I think that's a really good thing because it's a breakfast thing, even though I make cornbread for chili. So if I'm making cornbread for chili, we have grits for lunch. So so that's our corn school for the day. I hope you've learned something new or something that's helpful there. So now that school's over, let's bake. This is just to show you the white corn and yellow corn. So this just has a bolder flavor. This is a milder flavor. The cornbread recipe I use is from Sue Becker's Red Book. It's page 43 of her Red Book. I do tend to add a little bit more milk than she says, and for the butter she says 2 to 3 tablespoons. I always use 3. You'll see with corn, they're very big pieces, and when you go to get a cup of corn or something, it's hard to get the exact same measurement every time. So sometimes you make it and it's a little bit drier after everything's incorporated. So you just add a little bit more milk till it's the right consistency. sometimes I tend to add my liquid slower as I see how the batter is coming. And maybe sometimes I need a little bit less milk than what she says. I tend to need to add a little bit more, but that's my preference. It makes a moister cornbread in the end, and maybe you like yours a little bit drier or more crumb or something. So up to you to do exactly what you like to do, because we cook for ourselves and our family and what we like. So I'm giving you a jumping off point here. So the one thing I didn't mention before is the impact mills with the steel mill heads. I always want to say steel mill heads. With the steel mill heads do amazing flour, very fine, beautiful, perfect flour. And there's a coarse setting, and you can get a minimally coarse cornmeal. But you can't do a very coarse cornmeal, and you can't do grits in impact mills. I feel very blessed to be able to have a stone mill and an impact mill. The stone mills, you can move the mill heads apart and crack things and get very, very coarse ground things in them. So I appreciate being able to have both. If you don't have a stone mill, if you have a very strong blender, you can do grits in the blender. Also, I've heard even better than that, some of my friends have got really good results with a coffee grinder. You just make sure that all the coffee's out. You kind of blend some rice in there to get it all cleaned out of flavor, because you don't want, or maybe you do want some coffee flavored grits. That might not be bad. I'm usually drinking coffee when I have grits anyway, so. But there are ways to do it. You don't just have to buy a mill just to do grits, because I mean, I think grits are worthy to buy a mill for, but. So however you're going to be able to do it, I'll mill with my stone mill, my mock mill, and show you what they should look like. But I mean, you've seen dried grits that you get from the store, and that's kind of what we're aiming for. And with the mock mill, we can do smaller grits or larger grits. You can choose your variety if you like a bigger grit or a smaller grit, or even smaller and go polenta-esque. Up to you. It's what you enjoy eating, what you want to eat. So I'm going to use my mock mill. First, we need 1.5 cups of wheat. You can use any wheat you want. You can use kamut, you can use einkorn, go for it. I'm just going to use my soft white wheat, because we don't need to build gluten. We don't need anything to rise big and airy, so I'm just going to go for my 1.5 cups of soft white wheat flour. So I'm just going to mill 1 cup of soft white wheat berries. We have a ridiculously comedic amount of bowls out for this, but we're going to have to sift corn. So I'm going to move my flour out of the way, and this will be the bowl we mix everything. Now we're going to get into milling our corn. So if you like a finer, smaller grit particle, grit, is that a singular form of grits? If you like them smaller, then on the mock mill, you can set it to like an 8. If you like a bigger grit, a more coarse grit, or grits, this is ridiculous, I don't know how to talk about this. If you like coarser grits, then we're going to set it at 9, 10. Even you could go 11, 12. How we talked about, you have your 10, and then you disengage this, you untwist it because it's a screw, and then bring it back to 1, re-engage it, and then we went from 1 to 10. So the stone heads were together, and now they're a little bit apart. And then we take it, set it, and now we're at 11. So we can take it from 11 to 20, and even you can go 21 to 30. So you have a lot of choices. So I would recommend stay between 8 and 12. I tend to mill it like a 9, 9.5. That's where we seem to like our grits. It's what works for us. But you know you, and you do what you like. So I'll show you what I end up with, and you can judge if you want bigger, more coarse pieces or smaller. Okay, so what we're aiming for, because I know we're going to make cornbread and we're also going to make grits, so we do want to end up with a cup of grits. So inevitably when you try and get grits, you're going to get corn flour or cornmeal. So you're never going to have just the right proportions to make the exact amount that you want. You're going to have a little bit over one way or the other. But to get a cup of grits, let's start with a cup and a half of corn and see where we end up. It's different because every time you get a cup of corn, there's a different amount of corn in there. So you kind of just wing it and hope for the best. So if you look close, you can see grits and corn flour or cornmeal. I'd say it's cornmeal, it's coarser corn flour. So now our job is to sift through all this and then measure what we have. So we showed a little clip of the different meshes in the strainer. I have found if I use a very wide mesh, I lose too much of the grits and I end up having to mill an awful lot of corn. And I figured out, even though it's more work and more time consuming, this gets me more grits and wastes less corn because I don't want 5 cups of corn flour while I'm trying to get the right amount of grits. But I think my big one is wider than most. I don't know where I got it. I use it all the time, but it is not good for this. So I need to find something in between these two that's bigger, because this is comical also to sit here and sift with. But all we're going to do is just get your flour into one bowl and your grits go into a different bowl. So we have a ridiculous amount of bowls set out for this. You can always have a little bit of grits in your cornbread. When you make it with the corn flour, it's all right to have a little bit of grits in there with it. You cannot, though, have a good amount of flour in with your grits, because if you put grits and flour into water, you're going to get kind of a stodgy, gelatinous mess that is not going to end up being very good. It's not going to look like what you want it to look like. It's not going to have the texture you want it to have. So really pay attention to taking the time now to sift out all this flour, this cornmeal, and just get your grits by themselves. So don't worry if you accidentally hit it and some grits go into the flour. That's not a problem. We're just worried about getting the flour out. 5 hours later, I'm done sifting. I need a much bigger sift. I have that little one. It's quite funny to sit here and do that forever. But I ended up doing about 2 cups of corn, and I have a cup and a half of grits and a cup and a half of corn flour. And I cheated a little bit because I ended up having a little bit more grits and less cornmeal. So I took some of the grits and just milled them on a finer setting and evened out. So I yielded more grits than corn flour, but I just stole some of the grits and put it in. But I did use around 2 cups of corn for that. So, and I milled on a 9. Okay, so now that we have all our containers of all of our flour products, I've already measured this to make sure I have the right amount. So this is, I have measured it. And I didn't tell you before, the recipe on 43 in Sue Becker's Red Book, I'm doubling it because a single recipe just isn't enough for our whole family. So everything is doubled that I'm telling you, but I'll put the original recipe in the description below the box or below the video. So, okay, so a cup and a half we already have of soft white wheat or whatever grain you want to mill for your flour, and then a cup and a half of cornmeal. And you can do it as coarse a cornmeal as you like, and you can even go to a corn flour, which is just the same thing, just finely milled. So the grits I'm putting to the side for our grits, which are up next. Okay, to this we're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. We like the Redmond's real salt, so it's got all those vitamins, minerals, nutrients in there, and it hasn't been touched by any processes or heated. So 1 teaspoon. and a half. So it calls for 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder, so double that, it's 5. We know 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. So I'm going to do a tablespoon, 3 teaspoons, and then 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So that was 3 teaspoons, 4, 5. So 1.5 cups of milk. I'm going to put in 1, and I'm going to reserve my half just till the end so I can see, you know, if I need a little bit less moisture, a little bit more moisture. So I'll just put my 1 cup in now. I'm going to put this here to remind me. I've been known to get tired and forget things. Okay, and then 4 tablespoons of honey. 4 tablespoons of honey is 1/4 a cup. So instead of trying to do 4, I'm just going to do 1 because I am a work smart, not hard kind of person here. So 4 tablespoons honey. So 2 eggs. And then doubled, I'm doing 6, well, I'm going to have to heat it again. I heated it and then it took forever. 6 tablespoons of butter. While I was microwaving my butter again, it had formed a solid layer on top, but underneath was still liquid. And so what happens when moisture gets trapped? It breaks through, and I just blew up my butter all over my, my microwave. But thankfully, I hadn't just cleaned my microwave, so now I know I need to clean it. And excuse me while I wash my buttery hands. Okay, so we're gonna just mix it all together. I've just added the full 1.5 cups of milk, and I think that looks right today. So you can see the cornmeal adds nice texture. It's not a buttery smooth batter. And if you would have wanted more of a coarse cornmeal, it's going to be even more textured than this. But this is about what I go for. This seems to be what my family enjoys the most. So when you're judging how much milk or moisture to put in, this is what I'm looking for. A nice thick batter. It stands up when it makes a impression when it plops down. It doesn't just sink back in like a cake batter would. It's very textured. It's very thick. So this looks right to me. I think this is an 8x8 pan. I have the USA pan that's silicone lined, so I don't need to grease it or put anything in there. But however you normally grease a pan so stuff doesn't stick, do so, or parchment paper or whatever. I do have to say the recipe calls to bake this for 25 minutes at 425. And my oven is not usually this off. I can usually use the heat recommendations for all the recipes and come out fine. I have made cornbread. I can't even count how many times I've made it. When I bake at 425, it burns on the bottom. I always use this pan, this recipe. I add a little bit more moisture most of the time, but I mean, basically it's the same. I cannot figure out why that is. So I am going to bake at 410 for about 25 minutes. I always watch it and look at the top. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes a little less. We know how time goes with relative temperature, humidity, all that. So the time is not a problem. Maybe y'all should just do the 425 and your ovens and pans will obey. But for some reason, it doesn't work for me. So if you're using a bigger pan or a longer one, you might watch your time and bake it a little bit shorter than the 25 minutes just because it'll be thinner. So it'll cook a little bit faster. Just something to keep in mind. All right, so I'm going to cook this at 410, you can cook it at 425 for around 25 minutes. Just keep an eye at 20 minutes at the top that you have that nice golden color, but not turning black or anything. So while our cornbread is baking, we're gonna do the easy part. I've got a new toy, so it's a little bit easier to cook for you with a little burner here, so we're gonna try this out. I had 1.5 cups of grits. So the general rule is 1 cup of grits, you use 3 cups of water. And you can make the grits as soupy or as dry as you like, you know, by how long you boil it to let the steam, the water evaporate from it, so you can have really thick grits, whatever you like. I have the 1.5 cups of grits-ish, so I have about 4.5 cups of water, and we just have to get it to a boil, and then we'll get to our next step. So a watched pot never boils, so I'm gonna heat up my coffee. All right, you want to get the water to a rolling boil, but there's a trick. If you just pour your grits into the water and then try and stir, something goes amiss and it just turns really slimy and stodgy and not so good. So there's a trick, and we'll film it for you. As you get to a rolling boil, you're going to take your lid off, get your whisk going, and you're going to make a little hurricane in there, a little tornado, and you're just going to keep it going, and you're going to slowly pour your grits in while continuously, vigorously stirring, so that every single little grain of grits that's in there hits the water and goes in a circle. And then you're going to stir slowly. Once you get all your grits in there, you're going to slow your stirring, but not stop. So the first 5 minutes, you're going to stand there and you're gonna love your grits and just stir and stir and stir, because you don't want anything to stick to the bottom. Then you're gonna reduce your heat and just stir until the rolling boil goes away and they're not bubble popping anymore. And stir until it's calm, and then you're gonna put the lid on, and every few minutes just come back and stir. And then come back and stir, just to make sure nothing sticks to the bottom. Now, I've had it take a half an hour before. I've had it take like 20 minutes. So whatever the difference is, I don't know. And this is a new little contraption we have, so maybe it's a little bit different. So we will see, but we'll do like an overhead shot and a time lapse so we know what it ends up being. I always add a little salt once I get to a boil. So now I'm gonna make a little hurricane, and I'm gonna slowly pour my grits in there. All right, it is boiling, but I'm stirring so much you don't see the bubbles, but it's gonna thicken a bit here. So I wanna make sure that I'm stirring the whole time, and now I'm doing little circles all the way around, just keeping things from sticking to the bottom. Does your arm hurt yet? Because mine does. We just wanna keep everything moving, keep everything going, keep it from sticking to the bottom. So do any dance you want to with your whisk. There's you can see the bubbles, it's still that hot. And now I'm going to turn it down because it's starting to splatter. This heat is a little much. Ooh, that's hot. Apparently this little stovetop takes a while to cool down. Ideally at this point you don't want it to be this hot, popping bubbles. I'm just gonna let it, I've turned it pretty far down, and I'm just gonna let it cook for a little bit like this. Okay, from this point, we're just gonna stir, 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 put the lid on, do something real fast, come back every few minutes, 5-6 minutes, just stir, make sure nothing's sticking to the bottom till it's as thick as you like to have it. I've had it take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, so I can't give you an exact time. And this little stovetop, boy, it took a long time to go, but once it went, it didn't calm down very quickly. So I'm not sure how long these will take, but you know the grit texture and consistency that you like, so just aim for that. And that's when you're going to add your butter and your salt, and I will not offend you by telling you how much butter to put in. You put in how much butter your heart says needs butter in that grits. Add your salt and butter when you think it's about right. There's our cornbread. Let's get that out and take a look at it. All right, so my full grits, and we'll show you a close-up, took about 22 minutes to make, and my cornbread I did bake for 24 minutes, not the 25, and that looked good to me. And the edges were starting to darken up, and I said, that's probably good. So for me, I cooked it at 410. I don't know what your oven does or what there's just something with this recipe and my oven. Usually the oven's spot on, but the grits and the cornbread, they're so rewarding. They take a little bit of effort. The sifting's the worst part. Making the grits is easy. Making the cornbread, super easy. It's just the sifting, but it's so worth it. It just smells so good. I wish that I could share this with you right here and we could sit at a table and eat it so you could taste just how full of flavor it is. And you won't expect cornbread or grits to have such a depth of flavor. And I am not tooting my own horn. It's nothing to do with me. It's freshly milled corn just has so much more flavor, and the nutrients are there, and you can feel good about eating it. So let's crack this open and see what we have here. It's still very hot, and like I say every week, you should wait to cut it, but who can do that? Oh, and you see how good that smells? It cuts so smoothly. See, it's still a little moist because it's so hot, so I have some stick in there, but if I had waited to cool, this is just, it's so good. It's light and fluffy. It's full of flavor. There's just a big difference between the box mix that I grew up with, that I know, and that I had been making, and this. It's just on just a different level. And then our delicious grits. Look at those. They're so good. Grits just like you know them, but full of flavor. I hope y'all have enjoyed making cornbread and grits with me. I hope that I have explained milling the corn with the mock mill for you and inspired you to try this freshly ground corn goodness. And you can eat corn and not feel bad, because all the information you have on corn is about corn that's been ripped apart and not used whole like it should. So don't feel, I mean, this has a good amount of butter and stuff in it, but you know, you have all the nutrients and the fiber and the good stuff of the corn that's in there, and the antioxidants, which we just learned about. So try this. And corn flour in place of other flours, try that in a bread or a pasta or anything. See how it goes. It's a good flavor flour, and it adds a little bit of a texture to what you're eating. So enjoy trying new things. And my daughters wanted to be here in the video, but they went out to fly a kite, and they just decided they didn't want to come back in. So they say goodbye, and I say have a wonderful week, and know that I am so thankful for y'all, and I am praying for y'all. Like, I don't just say that, I really am. And I pray that y'all are healthy and well, having a good week, and have fun exploring freshly milled flour goodies that we get to bake. And I will see you next week. Bye.